The sun was setting behind the suburban houses, casting a soft orange glow over the neatly trimmed lawns and carefully maintained flower beds. Our home stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a quaint two-story with white siding and blue shutters. It was the kind of house that seemed to promise warmth and security, a place where laughter echoed down the hallways and the smell of home-cooked meals lingered in every corner. It was our haven, our sanctuary, and for as long as I could remember, it had been the backdrop to countless family dinners and celebrations. The dining room was my favorite part of the house, an inviting space with light streaming through the large bay window, illuminating the cherry wood table that had been in the family for generations. This table, with its polished surface and carved legs, had borne witness to years of family gatherings, each chair around it a silent keeper of secrets and stories, laughter and tears. There were 5 chairs in total, one for each member of our family. My mother could often be found there, meticulously setting the table with her favorite porcelain dinnerware, her hands moving with the precision of one who found comfort in routine. Dinner was a sacred ritual in our household, a time when the world outside paused, when we came together to share our day, to connect over meals lovingly prepared by my father. He was a man of few words, but many gestures, and the way he cooked was his language of love. My younger sister, Lily, was always the first to arrive at the table, her face full of mischief and curiosity, eager to recount her day. My mother would hush her with a soft smile, reminding her to wait until we all sat down. And then there was my brother, Ethan. The eldest among us, he had a quiet confidence, an unspoken authority that anchored the family. He was the one who always knew what to say, the one who could dispel tension with a single joke or a kind word. His chair was directly across from mine, and I would often catch his eyes while we ate, sharing a silent understanding only siblings could have. But tonight, as I moved around the room, setting the table for another meal, there was an unfamiliar stillness. The clink of cutlery against the plates felt unusually loud, and the soft creak of the table as I leaned against it seemed to echo in the silence. I couldn't quite place why everything felt so different, so off, like a painting slightly askew on the wall, begging to be straightened. Dinner was served at 7, as it always was, and we gathered around the table. My mother sat on my left, my father at the head, and Lily on my right, her face alight with stories yet to be told. But my eyes were drawn to the empty chair across from me, Ethan's chair, where no one sat. It had been a year since his accident, a year since we lost him, and yet his presence, or rather his absence, sat like a tangible entity at our table. The first few months after Ethan's death were a blur of grief and disbelief. We tried to maintain our routines, but the emptiness lingered, a shadow that stretched across our lives, touching everything we did. We kept his chair at the table, as if the act of setting it would somehow bring him back, would somehow fill the void left behind. As dinner progressed, I noticed my mother's eyes darting to the chair more frequently, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her glass. My father, ever the stoic, stared intently at his plate, his fork moving mechanically. Lily, who had once been so full of life and laughter, picked at her food in silence, her gaze fixed on the space where Ethan should have been. It was near the end of the meal when I first heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the clatter of cutlery. I paused, my fork hovering midair, listening intently. The sound was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined it. I glanced around the table, but no one else seemed to have noticed. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers became more frequent. They were elusive, always on the edge of my perception, like an unfinished melody lingering in the air. Sometimes they were just that, hushed murmurs that faded as soon as I tried to focus on them. Other times, they were more like snippets of conversations, words echoed from memories I couldn't quite grasp. I tried to dismiss them, attributing them to stress or fatigue, but they persisted, weaving themselves into the fabric of our daily lives. My dreams were filled with echoes of laughter and voices calling my name, only to dissolve into silence when I awoke. One evening, As I sat alone in the living room, the whispers came again, more insistent than before. They seemed to be coming from the direction of the dining room, and I found myself drawn towards the sound. The room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through the window, casting long shadows across the table. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers had grown louder, more distinct, and I could almost make out words, fragments of phrases that seemed achingly familiar. I stepped into the room, my eyes fixed on Ethan's empty chair, and as I did, the whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. I stood there for several moments, waiting, watching, but nothing happened. The room was just a room, the chair just a chair, and yet the feeling of being watched, of being in the presence of something unseen, lingered long after the whispers had faded. The next day, I decided to speak to my mother about what I had been experiencing. I found her in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, tending to the flowers Ethan had planted years ago. She looked up as I approached, a question in her eyes. I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. "Mom," I started, "have you noticed anything unusual lately?" She regarded me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean, unusual?" "The whispers," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I've been hearing whispers in the dining room, usually when we're all there, but sometimes when I'm alone too." She paused, her hand stilling in the earth, and for a moment I feared I had overstepped, had voiced what should have remained unspoken. But then she nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "I've heard them too," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it was just me, that maybe I was imagining things. Relief washed over me, mingled with a renewed sense of unease. If we were both hearing it, then perhaps it wasn't just in my mind. We fell into a thoughtful silence, the weight of our shared acknowledgement hanging between us. As summer faded into autumn, the frequency of the whispers increased, and with them came other occurrences, doors creaking open without a breeze, the faint sound of footsteps in the hall, and once I found the dining room window ajar, though no one had opened it. Each incident was small, almost inconsequential, but together they formed a pattern, an undeniable presence that seemed to permeate our home. One evening, as I sat at the dining table, lost in thought, I felt a sudden chill sweep over me. It was as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees, and I shivered involuntarily. I glanced around, seeking the source, and my eyes landed on Ethan's chair. The whispers began again, louder and clearer than ever before, and this time there was no mistaking it. Ethan's name was being called, over and over, like a chant. My heart raced as I listened, and I felt an inexplicable urge to respond, to call out to him, to reach across the void that separated us. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, and then, ever so slowly, the chair across from me began to move. It wasn't much, just a slight tilt forward, as if someone had leaned in to listen, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear and hope through me. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor, and the movement stopped. The room returned to its familiar stillness, leaving me breathless and shaken. I stumbled back, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Had I really just seen that? Was it possible, or was I losing my grip on reality? That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. The whispers, the movement, the chill in the air, it all pointed to something beyond my understanding, something that both terrified and fascinated me. The following day, I confided in my father. We were in the garage, sorting through old tools, when I broached the subject. He listened quietly, his face a mask of concentration, and when I finished, he nodded slowly. "I felt it too," he admitted, his voice gruff with emotion. "I didn't want to say anything, didn't want to scare you or your sister, but I've sensed something ever since that night. It's like Ethan's still here, trying to reach him. I felt a swell of relief at his words, a confirmation that I wasn't alone in this, that we were experiencing it together. We decided to keep it to ourselves for the time being, to observe and see if the occurrences would continue. The days slipped by, carrying with them an undercurrent of tension and anticipation that built with each passing moment. The whispers persisted, a constant hum in the background of our lives, and the strange phenomenon showed no signs of stopping. The climax came on a stormy night in late October. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering across the pavement. We were gathered in the living room, the glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was subdued, each of us lost in our thoughts, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. It was Lily who broke the silence. She had been staring at the fire, her expression distant. When she spoke, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I've seen him," she said, her words startling in their simplicity. We turned to her, surprise and curiosity mingling with disbelief. "What do you mean, you've seen him?" my mother asked gently. Lily hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "In my dreams," she confessed, "he's always there, just out of reach. I try to talk to him, but he never answers. He just looks at me like he's trying to tell me something." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, a confirmation of what I had feared all along. Ethan was still with us, bound to us by some unseen force, his presence intertwined with ours in a way we couldn't fully comprehend. The room fell silent, each of us processing Lily's revelation in our own way. And then, as if summoned by our collective acknowledgement, the whispers began again, louder and more insistent than ever. This time, there was no mistaking their intent. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and the room was filled with a palpable sense of urgency. I felt a pull towards the dining room, a compulsion I couldn't resist, and I rose from my seat, my family following in a silent procession. We gathered around the table, our eyes drawn to Ethan's empty chair, and as we stood there, something remarkable happened. The room grew still, the whispers faded into a soft murmur, and for a moment there was a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that settled over us like a warm blanket. In that instant, I understood. Ethan's presence was not one of malice or unrest, but of love, a desire to remain connected, to be remembered and cherished. He was not haunting us, but guiding us, reminding us of the bonds that death could not sever. We stood together, united in our shared grief and love, and in that moment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a release that was both cathartic and profound. The whispers faded, leaving behind a lingering sense of calm, a promise that though Ethan was gone, he would always be with us. As the days turned into weeks and then months, the occurrences gradually ceased. The whispers became less frequent, the strange phenomena dwindled until they were little more than distant memories, echoes of a time when the line between the living and the dead had blurred. But the empty place at the table remained, a silent testament to the brother we had lost, a reminder of the love that would endure beyond the veil of time. And though we moved forward, carrying with us the memories and the lessons learned, the empty chair remained a part of our family, a symbol of the unbreakable bond that connected us to Ethan, now and forever. The day of my wedding was a sun-drenched, serene affair that seemed to float on air. It was a day filled with the kind of idyllic normalcy that most people dream of, every detail falling into place as if orchestrated by a benevolent hand. The boutique where I found my dress was quaint, nestled on a cobblestone street lined with flower boxes heavy with blooms. I remember the smell of fresh roses mingling with the crisp scent of pressed fabric as I slipped into the gown. It molded to me with a perfect fit, the lace delicate and intricate, like frost patterns on a window pane. My mother dabbed tears from her eyes, whispering how beautiful I looked. Friends and family bustled about, their laughter and chatter an undercurrent to the gentle classical music playing in the background. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Vows were exchanged in a small, sunlit chapel, the kind with stained glass windows that cast colorful shadows on the polished wooden pews. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the bittersweet tang of history, each note resonating with a solemnity that warmed me from the inside out. I felt enveloped by the presence of something profound, something that promised to guard and guide through life's unpredictable currents. As the officiant pronounced us married, a swell of joy, pure and unfettered, rose within me, mingling with the applause of our guests. But then, the first disturbance, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of a breeze through the leaves. During the reception, held in the sprawling garden behind the chapel, I noticed a stranger. He was standing at the edge of the festivities, just beyond the reach of the twinkling fairy lights that adorned the trees. His presence was an enigma, the kind of detail that would have slipped past unnoticed had it not been for an unaccountable chill that pricked at my skin whenever my gaze flickered in his direction. He was dressed in a suit that seemed slightly out of fashion, the fabric worn yet elegant, as though it had seen many gatherings over the years. His face was partially obscured by shadows, the angle of his stance hiding his eyes. Yet there was something familiar, almost hauntingly so, about his silhouette. I felt a twinge of recognition that I couldn't quite place, a connection that trembled on the edge of my consciousness like the echo of a half-remembered dream. As the evening wore on, the stranger became a fixture in the periphery, always just out of reach, a presence that threaded through the jubilant crowd like a needle through fabric. It wasn't until after the toast, when the first stars were beginning to prick the sky, that I saw him again. This time he was closer, under the glow of a lantern. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I was looking into the eyes of a man I had buried 5 years ago, my brother, David. The escalation was swift, a spiral that began as a ripple and soon threatened to engulf everything in its path. I stumbled back, my heart a wild drumbeat in my chest. Memories, long buried yet never forgotten, rose unbidden. My brother's tragic death, the shattering grief that followed, the seemingly endless procession of days tinged with the gray of morning. And now here he was, impossibly alive. I blinked, expecting the vision to dissolve, but David remained, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that was both chilling and comforting. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to confirm the solidity of his form, but an inexplicable fear rooted me to the spot, a primal instinct whispering that to acknowledge him publicly would unravel the fabric of reality itself. Throughout the rest of the reception, our silent interaction continued. He moved among the guests with a fluid grace, a ghost flitting through the celebrations unnoticed by anyone but me. It was as though we were bound by a thread of shared awareness, an understanding that defied explanation. I watched him, searching for signs of decay or otherworldliness, but he seemed impossibly normal, alive. The climax came later that night, as the last of the guests trickled away, leaving behind a trail of laughter and empty glasses. I stood alone in the garden, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. The air was thick with the scent of rain, a storm looming on the horizon. I had to know, I had to unravel the mystery that now lay between my past and my present like a shadow. David, I called, my voice trembling in the stillness. He appeared from the darkness, stepping into the pool of light cast by the lantern. His expression was one of quiet sorrow, a reflection of the confusion and longing that churned within me. Why? I asked, the single word a plea, a demand for answers. He paused, his gaze steady and unflinching. I came to see you happy, to see you safe, he replied, his voice a gentle echo of the brother I remembered. I couldn't leave without knowing you were truly living. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the edges of his form. But how? How is this possible? David shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Some things are beyond understanding, beyond what we can see or touch. You must lie, truly lie, without fear of what lies beyond. As he spoke, I felt a warmth spreading through me, a reassurance that his presence was a gift rather than a curse. The fear that had knotted my heart began to unravel, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The lingering fear, however, was not entirely banished. Even as dawn began to break, painting the sky with hues of lavender and gold, the reality of what had transpired clung to me like a shadow. David faded with the morning light, leaving behind a void filled with questions and the faint whisper of his hope for me to carry forward. Life continued, days rolling into weeks, each one a step further into the unknown. I tried to embrace the happiness he had offered, yet there were moments when I would catch a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, or feel a chill in the warmest room, and wonder if he was still watching, still waiting. In the quiet moments before sleep, I would replay his words, searching for hidden meanings, for reassurance. The understanding that we are not alone, that perhaps the veil between here and beyond is thinner than we perceive, became a new part of my reality. David's visit had left an indelible mark, a testament to the power of love that transcends even the finality of death. And so, as I continued to navigate the currents of my life, I held on to the memory of my brother's spectral presence, a guardian from the other side. He had given me the gift of courage, the courage to live fully, to face the unknown with open eyes and a heart unburdened by fear. Though his form had faded, his essence lingered, a silent promise that love endures, unbroken by time or the boundaries of life and death. Every now and then, when the wind rustles the leaves in a certain way or the light catches the world just so, I feel him near. And in those moments, I am reminded that some connections are eternal, etched into the fabric of existence by the hands of faith and carried forward by the unyielding strength of the human spirit.
In the digital age, where the veil between reality and virtuality grows increasingly ephemeral, I found solace and connection in the unlikeliest of places, online forums. They became my sanctuary, a place where anonymity allowed for confessions and camaraderie with strangers who shared similar obsessions and questions about life and its many mysteries. My obsession, though, was deeply personal. It stemmed from a loss that lingered like a shadow behind every moment of my life. The disappearance of my younger brother, Caleb. He was the kind of soul that breathed vitality into the mundane, whose absence left a void that reverberated through the corridors of our family's existence. For years, Caleb's disappearance was a raw wound, one that time did not heal, but instead allowed to fester beneath the surface of my everyday routine. One evening, while aimlessly traversing the vast expanse of the internet, I stumbled upon a peculiar forum titled Echoes from the Void. It was a digital space purportedly dedicated to communications from the deceased. The premise seemed absurd, almost comical in its audacity, yet something about it tugged at a deeply buried instinct. Curiosity piqued, I ventured further, my mouse cursor hovering over the link with a mix of anticipation and skepticism. The forum's interface was stark and minimalistic, as if designed to mimic an untouched canvas, ready to be filled with the echoes of silent voices. I scanned through the threads, each one a testament to the human desire to reach beyond the grave, to touch the intangible. It was eerie, yet oddly comforting, this sense of shared desperation. Then I found it, a thread titled Messages from the Lost. I clicked on it, my heart pounding with a sense of inexplicable urgency. The posts within were varied. Some were vague whispers of reassurance, others cryptic messages of foreboding. As I scrolled, a particular post caught my eye. "Caleb, are you still there?" My breath caught in my throat. The name was too common for instant recognition, yet something told me this was no coincidence. I clicked to expand the thread, my fingers trembling with a mix of hope and dread. The first post was simple, a greeting from a user named Wanderer. There was an unmistakable familiarity in the tone, a resonance that struck a chord deep within me. I am here, it read, though the world around me is not as it was. It is empty, yet I am not alone. More messages followed, each one more detailed, more personal. The shadows watch over us here. They are not unfriendly, but they are not friends. They ensure we do not stray too far, that we remember where we are. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Could this truly be Caleb? Or was it a cruel trick played by some heartless stranger? Yet, the details, only someone deeply familiar with my brother's idiosyncrasies could weave such a tapestry. Days turned into weeks as I immersed myself in this digital correspondence. I responded to the post with questions only Caleb could answer, and the replies were eerily accurate details about our childhood, about the night he vanished, a night I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times, were recounted with haunting precision. The night was calm, the moon a sliver in the sky, he wrote. The shadows were gentle then, mere whispers in the corners of my vision. I did not mean to leave, but they called to me, and I followed. I sat staring at the screen, the room around me fading into insignificance. There was a sincerity, a desperation in the words that transcended the barrier of the screen. It was as if my brother were reaching out to me, his presence palpable, his voice resonant across the digital divide. Despite the growing conviction that I was indeed communicating with Caleb, there was an unease that settled into my bones, an inherent wrongness about the entire situation. The forum, once a source of solace, took on an unsettling atmosphere. The more I delved into its threads, the more I encountered others who claimed to converse with lost loved ones, their messages tinged with melancholy and resignation. It became clear that this was no ordinary corner of the internet. The forum was a gateway, a portal to a parallel existence where shadows held court over the spirits who wandered its desolate landscapes. Yet, for all its eeriness, it was also a realm of profound connection, a bridge between the living and the departed. As my exchanges with Caleb grew more frequent, his descriptions of the world he inhabited became more vivid. It is a reflection of our world, he explained, but devoid of life. The buildings stand silent, untouched by time. The only movement comes from the shadows, ever watchful, ever present. The escalation came unexpectedly, like a sudden chill in the air. I was reading a new post from Caleb when the screen flickered, the text warping as though touched by an unseen hand. "They are restless," he wrote. "The shadows grow agitated. They know you are watching. They do not like it." The words sent a shiver through me. Was I intruding on something beyond my understanding? Trespassing in a realm where I did not belong? Yet my yearning for connection, for answers, was a stronger force than my fear. In the days that followed, I became acutely aware of an unsettling presence around me, as if the shadows in my own world had come alive, stretching across the walls and floor with a life of their own. It was subtle at first, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a shape that seemed to shift ever so slightly. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a trick of the mind fueled by my late-night vigils on the forum, but the sensation grew, creeping into every corner of my consciousness until I could no longer ignore it. The shadows were watching, waiting, just as Caleb had described. I called out to him in desperation, begging him to tell me more about his world, about these shadowy jailers. His response was swift, the words appearing on the screen with an urgency that belied their calm tone. "They are guardians," he explained, "keepers of the boundary between our worlds. They ensure balance, and they are not pleased with your intrusion." His words weighed heavy on my chest, a burden of guilt and fear. I had taken solace in the Forum, but in doing so, I had crossed a line, bridged a gap that was not meant to be bridged. The shadows, in their silent vigilance, were a reminder of the natural order, of the boundaries that should not be transgressed. The climax of my ordeal came one night as I sat alone in my dimly lit room, the glow of the computer screen my only source of light. I had just received a new message from Caleb. A warning more than an update. "They are here," it read. "They come to close the gap." As if on cue, the shadows in the room began to shift, coalescing into forms that seemed almost human. My heart raced as I watched them move with a fluidity that defied comprehension. They circled me in a dance of darkness, their presence both menacing and strangely comforting. In that moment, I understood. The shadows were not merely jailers, they were guides. Guardians of a boundary I had unwittingly crossed. Their purpose was not to harm, but to restore balance, to ensure the sanctity of the realms remained intact. I closed my eyes, surrendering to their cold embrace, feeling their touch as a gentle caress rather than a grip of terror. In that darkness, I heard Caleb's voice one last time, a whisper on the edge of consciousness. "Remember me, but do not seek me. I am where I need to be." When I opened my eyes, the shadows had receded, leaving the room as it was, the computer screen dark and silent. The Forum was gone, its digital pages wiped clean as though they had never existed. Yet, the memory of Caleb's messages lingered, a testament to the impossible connection we had forged. In the days that followed, the shadows remained a constant presence, a reminder of the boundary that separates the living from the dead. They watched over me, their vigilance a silent promise that the worlds would remain apart, and that I would respect the balance they upheld. Though I never found Caleb in the physical sense, the experience left an indelible mark on my soul. I had glimpsed a world beyond, touched the edge of a mystery that defies explanation. The shadows, once ominous jailers, had become silent guardians, their presence a comfort rather than a threat. And so I live with the lingering fear, not of the shadows themselves, but of the delicate balance they protect. I am haunted not by the absence of my brother, but by the knowledge of his existence in a realm beyond my reach. It is a fear tempered by understanding, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, that some connections must be cherished rather than pursued. In the end, I found my brother not in the flesh, but in the echoes of a world parallel to our own, where shadows dance and the dead still speak. The sun was setting over Lock Road, painting the sky a tapestry of deep oranges and purples. It was a typical evening in my small, quiet town. A comforting routine of returning home after a long day at work, the familiar creak of the front gate, the comforting click of the door lock. It was all part of a rhythm that carried me through most days. The neighborhood itself was calm, almost too calm, with only the occasional sound of a distant car engine or a dog barking in the backyard. It was the kind of place where change seemed to drift by like an occasional breeze, gentle and unremarkable. I had lived in this neighborhood for most of my life, a fact that had always lent me a sense of security. My neighbors were mostly the same families I had grown up knowing, sharing the same quiet routines. The familiarity was comforting, the predictability reassuring. Lock Road was a sanctuary, a place where the world's troubles seemed as distant as a forgotten dream. Then one evening, while sitting on my porch, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A shadowy figure at the end of the street. It was a silhouette against the fading light, standing still, almost as if it were waiting. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a tired mind playing games after a long day. But the next evening, the figure was there again. And the evening after that. Always standing, always waiting. It became a fixture of my twilight view. An unsettling presence that gnawed at the edges of my peace. It was on the fourth evening that I decided to investigate. Curiosity mixed with a vague unease as I approached the figure. As I drew nearer, I could see it was a man, dressed in a long, old-fashioned coat. His face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. My footsteps slowed as I sensed something was not quite right, a feeling that seemed to emanate from him like a palpable aura of wrongness. "Good evening," I called out, trying to sound casual, though my heart was beginning to race. The man turned slightly, the brim of his hat lifting just enough for me to see the reflection of the dying sun in his dark eyes. "Good evening," he replied, his voice smooth and calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "I am the messenger." "The messenger of what?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop myself. "Of the inevitable," he said, and though his words were cryptic, they chilled me to the bone. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his form melting into the shadows of the night. I stood there for several moments, my mind racing to make sense of the encounter. Still rattled, I returned home, attempting to shake off the encounter as some strange prank or misunderstanding. But the messenger did not vanish from my thoughts. Each evening, I found myself looking for him, anticipating his presence at the end of the street. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, a fear was beginning to take root, growing with each passing night. The unease followed me into my dreams, where shadowy figures whispered unintelligible secrets, always just out of reach. A week passed before the first incident. I was awoken in the middle of the night by a sudden profound silence. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath. I lay in bed, straining my ears, when a sound emerged from the quiet, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the window. Heart pounding, I rose and approached cautiously. As I pulled back the curtain, my breath caught in my throat. There, on the other side of the glass, was the messenger. His eyes bore into mine, a silent communication that carried volumes. Then he spoke, though his lips never moved. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Harding, needs you now." The voice was inside my head, clear and insistent. Before I could react, he was gone. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind in turmoil. Mrs. Harding had been a fixture on Lock Road long before I was born, a kind, elderly woman who lived alone after her husband passed. I dressed hurriedly and ran to her house, a sense of urgency propelling me forward. Her front door was ajar, a thin wedge of light spilling out onto the porch. I hesitated only for a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the house was silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway. I found Mrs. Harding in her living room, sitting in her favorite armchair, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. I called for an ambulance, my voice shaking with fear and adrenaline. As I waited, I held her hand, whispering words of comfort, though I doubted she could hear me. When the paramedics arrived, they moved with practiced efficiency, their faces calm and composed. I watched as they worked, feeling both grateful and helpless. Mrs. Harding was taken to the hospital, and I was left alone in her empty house, the silence pressing down on me with an almost physical weight. As I sat there, the events of the night played over in my mind. The messenger's warning had been clear and undeniable. But how had he known? And why had he chosen to tell me? In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Lock Road felt different, as if the fabric of reality had been subtly altered. My neighbors, oblivious to the encounter and its implications, carried on with their lives, their routines unchanged. I envied their ignorance. As for the messenger, he was nowhere to be seen, though I found myself expecting him at every turn. I was haunted by the memory of his eyes, the weight of his words. It was as if I had been marked, chosen for a purpose I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't long before the next message came. This time it was a vision, a sudden, vivid image of a motel room. Unfamiliar yet disturbingly real, I saw a man I did not recognize, alone and despairing. The image was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of dread, a certainty that he was in danger. Once again, I was compelled to act, to find this man and prevent whatever fate awaited him. The motel was a short drive from my home, one of those anonymous establishments that dot the outskirts of every town. As I approached, the sense of urgency grew stronger, driving me forward, even as doubt gnawed at my resolve. I found the room easily enough, the door slightly ajar as if waiting for me. Inside, the man sat on the edge of the bed, his face buried in his hands. At the sound of my entrance, he looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice filled with equal parts fear and hope. "I'm here to help," I replied, though I wasn't sure how or why. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. He told me his name was David, and that he had been battling demons of his own making, regret, loss, despair. He had come to this place seeking solitude, perhaps something more final. As he spoke, I realized the messenger's warning had not come a moment too soon. We talked for hours, the night slipping away unnoticed. I offered what comfort I could, sharing stories of my own struggles, my own battles with the darkness that sometimes threatened to consume. By the time the first light of dawn crept in through the curtains, David had found a measure of peace, a renewed strength to face the challenges ahead. As I left the motel that morning, I felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. I had intervened, for better or worse, and in doing so, had acknowledged the role I had unwittingly been assigned. I was the messenger's conduit, a reluctant participant in a supernatural chain of events. The following weeks passed in a haze of anticipation and anxiety. Each day brought the possibility of another message, another journey into the unknown. I learned to live with the uncertainty, though it weighed heavily on my mind. The once familiar comfort of Lock Road was now tinged with an eerie undercurrent, a reminder of the world beyond the veil of perception. Then came the night that changed everything. I had just returned from the grocery store, the mundane task a welcome distraction from the thoughts swirling in my head. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw him, the messenger, standing in the shadows by my front porch. This time, he did not wait for me to approach. Instead, he moved forward, his presence as commanding as ever. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt the familiar sensation of words forming in my mind. "It is time," he said, his voice a whisper of inevitability. "Time for what?" I asked, the question carrying the weight of all my fears and uncertainties. "To understand." With that, he reached out and touched my shoulder. The world around me dissolved into darkness, and I found myself in a place that defied comprehension, a landscape of shifting shadows and glimmers of light, where time and space were fluid, and the boundaries of reality blurred into nothingness. In this place, I saw them, the souls of those who had crossed paths with the messenger. Some were familiar, faces I recognized from the messages I had received. Others were strangers, their stories unwritten in my world, but deeply intertwined with the fabric of existence. They moved with a purpose, their presence a testament to the interconnectedness of all things. The messenger guided me through this realm, revealing the delicate balance between life and death, the intricate web of choices and consequences that defined our existence. It was a truth both beautiful and terrifying, a glimpse into the profound mysteries that lay beyond the veil. As we returned to the world I knew, the messenger's grip on my shoulder tightened, a final message conveyed with silent intensity. "You are not alone," he said, and then he was gone, leaving me to contemplate the revelations I had witnessed. In the days that followed, I struggled to assimilate the experience, to reconcile the knowledge I had gained with the life I continued to lead. Lock Road was the same, yet irrevocably changed in my eyes. The shadows held new meanings, the silence a symphony of untold stories. The messenger had shown me the curse of knowing, the weight of understanding the unseen forces that shaped our world. It was a burden I carried with a mixture of dread and wonder, a reminder that the boundaries between the known and the unknown were more porous than I had ever imagined. And so, I continued to live, to walk the familiar path of Lock Road, each step accompanied by the lingering fear of what lay beyond. The messenger was gone, but his presence remained, a ghostly echo in the quiet nights and the whispering winds, for I was the messenger now, a reluctant custodian of secrets that defied comprehension, a witness to the fragile dance of life and death. And in the shadows, I listened, waiting for the next message, the next call to journey into the unknown. I've always enjoyed the quiet solitude of my suburban neighborhood. It was a place where the laughter of children playing in the yards mingled with the distant hum of lawn mowers. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind was a constant companion, a soft backdrop to the rhythm of life that unfolded in a predictable sequence of days. My home, a modest two-story dwelling nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, was a comforting cocoon, a place where I felt anchored and safe. This sense of tranquility was abruptly shattered one overcast afternoon. I was enjoying a cup of tea by the window when an unfamiliar sound pierced the usual quietude. At first, it was just a distant wail, but it grew louder, more insistent, a siren, yet not quite like any I had heard before. It wasn't the sharp, piercing scream of a police car, nor the rhythmic howl of a fire truck. This was a deeper, more resonant call, something that seemed to vibrate through the bone. As I looked outside, I saw it, a sleek, black ambulance rolling down the street, its surface reflecting the dull gray of the sky. It was an odd sight, as out of place as a crow on a snowfield. The vehicle moved slowly, deliberately, as if it were searching for something or someone. It came to a stop in front of my house, the siren dying down into an unsettling silence. For a moment I was frozen, my mind unable to process this intrusion into my peaceful existence. A tall, thin man in a crisp, black uniform stepped out of the ambulance. His movements were precise, calculated. He had an air of authority, yet there was something off about him, something that sent a shiver down my spine. I watched as he approached my door, his footsteps barely making a sound on the concrete path. A polite knock 3 times broke the stillness. Hesitantly, I opened the door, peering out cautiously. The man stood there, a faint smile on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "We're here from the Black Ambulance Service. I'm afraid there's been a development." "A development?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he continued, unperturbed by my reluctance. We're conducting a survey in this area, and I'd like to ask you a few questions if you don't mind. It won't take long. There was something hypnotic in the way he spoke, an underlying insistence that made it difficult to refuse. Against my better judgment, I nodded and invited him inside. As he stepped over the threshold, I felt a sudden chill, as though the warmth had been sucked from the room. He produced a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen, looking at me with an expectant gaze. Have you noticed any strange occurrences in your neighborhood recently? He asked, his pen poised above the page. I hesitated. No, everything seems normal, I replied, though the presence of the black ambulance suggested otherwise. Have you received any unusual phone calls or messages? He continued, his eyes never leaving mine. No, I said again, though doubt began to creep in. Was there something I had missed? A call I hadn't answered? The man's questions, though seemingly benign, stirred an inexplicable unease within me. He nodded, jotting down my responses with an air of satisfaction. Thank you for your cooperation, he said, slipping the notebook back into his pocket. If anything changes, do let us know. We're here to help. With that, he left, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. I watched as the black ambulance drove away, the eerie silence it left behind more oppressive than ever. The days that followed were full of an unsettling quietness. My once comforting home now felt foreign, the shadows in the corners deeper and the silence heavier. The black ambulance lingered in my thoughts, an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. It was a week later when the first call came. The phone rang in the dead of night, the shrill sound jolting me awake. Heart pounding, I picked up the receiver, but it was met with silence on the other end. A breath, soft and measured, was the only sound before the line went dead. The next day, I received a note slipped under my door. The paper was thick and smooth, the handwriting elegant and precise. It read, "We know." No signature, no explanation, just those two words that sent a chill through my body. I began to notice other things, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, subtle changes in the layout of my home, as though someone had rearranged things just slightly when my back was turned. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, an invisible presence that lingered just out of sight. Each night the phone would ring, and each night silence would greet me on the other end. It was as if the black ambulance had opened a door to something I couldn't understand, something that was slowly unraveling the fabric of my reality. Desperate for answers, I tried to contact the black ambulance service. I searched online, but there was nothing. No phone number, no address, no mention of its existence. It was as if it were a ghost, a specter that had slipped through a crack in the world. The sense of isolation intensified. My once familiar neighborhood now felt like a foreign land. The laughter of children and the hum of lawnmowers seemed distant, as if coming from another world. I became acutely aware of the smallest sounds, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind against the windows, each one a reminder of my tenuous grip on reality. The climax came on an otherwise uneventful afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the room, when I heard it again, the siren. That deep, resonant wail that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. My heart raced as I rushed to the window. The black ambulance was there, parked once again outside my home. The same man stepped out, though this time he was not alone. A woman accompanied him, her expression serene yet unfathomable. Together, they approached my door, the same soft knock echoing in the silence. With trembling hands, I opened the door. They stood there, an imposing presence against the backdrop of the dying light. "Good afternoon," the man said, his voice as calm as ever. "We're here to follow up on our previous visit." "Follow up?" I asked, confusion and fear intertwining in my chest. "Yes, we've been monitoring the situation," the woman said, her voice a gentle counterpoint to the man's. "And we believe it's time for you to come with us." "Come with you?" I repeated, a sense of dread washing over me. "Don't worry," the man assured, his smile as enigmatic as ever. "It's just a precaution. We want to ensure everything is as it should be." I hesitated, the weight of their gaze pressing down on me. There was an inevitability to their words, a sense that resistance would be futile. Against my better judgment, I nodded, stepping outside into the chilling embrace of the evening. As I climbed into the back of the ambulance, I was struck by the stark emptiness within. There were no medical supplies, no equipment, just a single chair bolted to the floor. The man and woman sat up front, the door closing behind them with a finality that sent my heart racing. The ambulance began to move, the siren silenced, the streets outside slipping by in a blur. I sat in silence, the hum of the engine a constant companion. As we drove, an overwhelming sense of detachment washed over me, as though I were a spectator in my own life, watching events unfold from a distance. Eventually, the ambulance came to a stop. The doors opened, revealing a landscape that was both familiar and alien. We were in a place that seemed at once nowhere and everywhere, a space where time and reality bent and twisted beyond comprehension. The man and woman led me out, their presence both a comfort and a menace. "This is where it begins," the woman said, her voice a gentle whisper that carried an unsettling weight. "Where what begins?" I asked, my voice barely audible against the backdrop of this strange place. "Understanding," the man replied simply. With that, they turned and walked away, leaving me alone in this place that defied all logic. As I stood there, the boundaries of my world seemed to blur, the edges dissolving into shadows and light. I realized then that the black ambulance had been a harbinger, a messenger of the unknown that had come to claim me. And as the day faded into night, I knew that my life would never be the same. The black ambulance had taken me on a journey beyond the veil of normalcy, into a realm where reality and illusion danced an eerie waltz. I had become a part of the story, a chapter in a book that I had never meant to open. The lingering fear that settled into my bones was a testament to the power of the unknown, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And as I stood there, alone in that vast, surreal landscape, I understood that I was now a part of something much larger than myself, a story that would continue long after the echoes of the black ambulance had faded into the night. The hospital had long corridors painted in a neutral hue, a shade that seemed to absorb the light, rendering the passageways dim and slightly oppressive. I worked on the third floor of St. Mary's, a sprawling establishment that somehow managed to be both bustling and eerily silent. My days were filled with the mundane tasks of filing paperwork, organizing schedules, and occasionally checking in on patients with minor needs. The hospital was a world unto itself, a place that operated on its own rhythm, where life and death walked hand in hand down the linoleum tile paths. It was a job I had come to appreciate for its constancy. There was something reassuring about the predictable chaos of a hospital, about the way it hummed with a vitality that never ceased, like the steady pulse of a heart. But even within this environment of life and healing, there was a wing that doctors and nurses whispered about. The East Wing, they called it, always with a hint of dread in their voices. It was a place for long-term patients, those who required more than just physical healing, for they were often haunted by maladies of the mind. It was also where my story would take a turn I could never have anticipated. Dahlia was one such patient in the East Wing. She had been there for months, admitted for a reason that was never fully explained to me. Her chart was a mystery, filled with cryptic notes and diagnoses that seemed to contradict one another. Psychosomatic episodes, unexplained physiological changes, hallucinations, all words that painted a picture of confusion rather than clarity. I had noticed her name while sorting through some documents and felt an inexplicable pull. Something about her intrigued me. One evening, as I was finishing up and preparing to leave, I found myself wandering toward the East Wing. It was quieter there, the atmosphere heavy with a solemn silence that was both unnerving and strangely appealing. I made my way to room 307, where Dahlia was staying. Her presence had been like a whisper in the back of my mind, an elusive voice calling me to her door. The room was dimly lit, the blinds drawn shut, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. Dahlia was sitting up in bed, staring out into the darkness, her eyes large and luminous in the low light. They were an unsettling shade of blue, so vivid and intense that they seemed almost otherworldly. "Hello?" I said softly, stepping into the room, feeling an odd sense of intrusiveness. She turned her head slowly to face me, and for a moment I felt as though those eyes could see right through me, peeling back layers to reveal truths I wasn't even aware of. "You're not a doctor," she stated, her voice calm but edged with a curious intensity. "No, I'm not," I replied, approaching the foot of her bed. "I work with the admin team. Your file caught my attention." She regarded me with a look that was both knowing and distant, as if she had already anticipated my visit. "They don't know what's wrong with me, you know," she said, her gaze returning to the window. "They think I'm crazy because they can't explain it." "Explain what?" She was silent for a moment, and I thought perhaps she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The changes. I can feel something inside me, shifting, as if my body isn't my own anymore." I listened, the eeriness of her words sending a shiver down my spine. There was a sincerity in her voice that was hard to dismiss, a quiet conviction that suggested she was speaking a truth she didn't fully understand herself. Over the next few weeks, I found myself returning to Dahlia's room more often. Each visit pulled at a thread of fascination, unraveling a tapestry woven with shadows and mysteries. She spoke of her dreams, vivid and haunting landscapes where the laws of nature were rewritten before her very eyes. She described sensations, moments when her skin felt as though it were teeming with unseen movement, a ripple beneath the surface. One evening, as the autumn winds howled outside the hospital walls, Dahlia shared something that sent a chill through me. "They're watching me," she said, her eyes wide and feverish. The eyes, they're everywhere in my dreams, staring at me, waiting. "Whose eyes?" I asked, though a part of me dreaded the answer. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice a fragile thread. "But they're always there, and when I wake, it's as if they're still with me, just beneath my skin." Her words lingered long after I left her room, echoing in my mind as I lay in bed that night. I had begun to feel as though I were part of something larger, a narrative spinning out of control, its threads intertwined with both fear and curiosity. As weeks turned into months, Dahlia's condition seemed to worsen. Her skin took on a pallor that was almost translucent, as if she were fading away. But what struck me most was her eyes. They grew brighter, more intense, and when she looked at me, it felt as if I were being drawn into another world. The doctors were baffled. their theories growing more desperate as test after test returned inconclusive results. Dahlia's transformation was undeniable, yet it defied all logic. Some nights I would find myself wandering the hospital halls, listening for whispers of her name, an invisible thread pulling me back to her side. Then came the night that changed everything. I had stayed late, lost in paperwork, when I felt an overwhelming urge to see Dahlia. The corridors were deserted, the hospital cloaked in an unnatural stillness. As I approached her room, I noticed the door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Inside, Dahlia sat in bed, her form barely a shadow in the dim light. I hesitated, a sense of foreboding washing over me, but she spoke before I could turn away. "I can't hold them back any longer," she said, her voice a fragile wisp. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "The eyes," she murmured, and as she spoke, I saw her skin ripple as if something moved beneath it. "They want to be free." Fear gripped me as I watched in horrified fascination. Her skin seemed to undulate, the movement subtle but unmistakable, and then, as if in response to an unspoken command, her arms lifted and I saw them. Eyes, hundreds of them, surfacing from her flesh, each one blinking in eerie synchronization. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to process the impossible. The eyes were alive, each one reflecting the dim light, their gaze fixed upon me. Dahlia seemed both terrified and resigned, her own eyes now a part of the multitude. "They've been with me for so long," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't contain them anymore." I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away as the eyes continued their silent, haunting vigil. It was as if they were weighing me, measuring the depth of my fear, the weight of my soul. In that moment, I understood the true horror of her transformation. It was not just a physical change, but a doorway to something beyond comprehension, a merging of realities where the line between self and other was irrevocably blurred. The room grew colder, as if the eyes were drawing the warmth away, feeding on the fear in the air. I could feel them, probing my mind, teasing at the edges of my consciousness, inviting me to join their eternal watch. With a supreme effort, I tore my gaze away and stumbled to the door, the weight of their stares lingering on my back. As I fled down the corridor, I heard Dahlia's voice, soft and echoing, a farewell, or perhaps a warning. "Beware the eyes," she called, her words chasing me into the night. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the chill wind biting at my skin, a reminder of the world I still belonged to. Yet even as I stood there, gasping for breath, I felt their gaze, a presence that would not be so easily escaped. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to normalcy, to bury the memory of that night beneath the routine of my work. But the eyes haunted me, appearing in my dreams, lurking in the shadows of my waking hours. The hospital staff spoke of Dahlia's sudden disappearance with hushed voices, the mystery of her fate, a silent question that none dared to voice aloud. Her room was sealed off, the official explanation vague and unsatisfying. But I knew the truth. I had seen the impossible, witnessed the breach between worlds, and I carried the knowledge with me like a dark secret. The eyes were out there, waiting, watching, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our reality from the unknown. Now, as I walk the hospital halls, I feel their presence, a shadow at the edge of my vision. I look into the eyes of strangers, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of the supernatural lurking beneath their gaze. And each night, as I close my own eyes, I hear Dahlia's voice echoing through the darkness, a haunting lament that promises no escape. "Beware the eyes," she whispers, a chilling reminder of the unseen world that lies just beneath the surface of our own.